So we have it essentially going right through, and apparently it was open by, it says by 1985, the inpatient population had dropped from two down to 368. So originally this hospital could house, it was 1,750 people. That's huge.
Yeah.
Right? So by 1985, it was down to 368 patients, and by 1995, it was down to 211. The population ultimately fell to just under 200 by 2001. So there was still people there, possibly when you were there, Ian.
Oh,
Because
yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
okay. So the hospital's work continues today on the same grounds in a newly built facility. Century Manor is still standing, and this was going back some time. So here we
Yeah.
have.
And yeah, when I was there, I had some interaction with the patients, those who were not confined to the wards. They were actually allowed to wander the
Mhm.
hallways in the buildings,
Okay.
and yeah, I remember, one fellow. It's I mean, not to make light of his condition, but you've got to laugh. Um, yeah, I was wherever I was, and this fellow came up to me, and he says, "Which way is France?" And it caught me off guard because I wasn't expecting it. I'm like, "What?" He said, "Which way is France?" And I'm like, "Okay, understanding, where he's coming from with his condition." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll go along with this." And so I'm like, "Okay, let's see, east is that way." I said, "France is that way." And he's like, "Oh, okay, thanks very much." And off he went down the hallway. But it's yeah, it was a fun little period to be there. But yes, they did certainly still have the patients there when.
Right, just up and yeah, it says up until like early 2000s, I guess, is really when it. Now, I moved to Hamilton in 2007, and at that point, 2006. Yeah. I remember some of the buildings there at that point. They were still there. I mean, it wasn't the full hospital like in the original photo, but I do remember still quite a number. Probably would have been around the same amount of buildings as when you were there and it was still open. I do remember them being there, and we had kind of gone and walked the grounds and things at that point. And this was before they put up any fencing, or there was no fencing up. There was nothing up at that time, because I think then they put up that sort of wire fencing that they had around it. I guess that was when they were getting ready to demolish a good portion of it. But yeah, there was a number of times where I didn't get an opportunity to do it, but there was a few people that I know that did go explore the tunnels and do things like that. So it's, and I mean, we're able to today go to some of the other asylums that are still standing, especially like New York State has like Allegheny. There's a few other ones that are still, you can actually go and do tours or go do paranormal investigations. They hold them there, and you can
Yeah.
go.
Oh, the Trans-Allegheny
Yeah,
Asylum in
Trans-Allegheny.
West Virginia.
Exactly. Yes.
Again, that reminds me actually very
Yeah,
much
that's very.
of the old Hamilton Asylum. It's
It
this
does.
huge, massive stone building.
Yeah. It's
That again, just like the old Hamilton Asylum has a number of outreach buildings, and yeah.
Yeah, and I've been down there too, to the Trans-Allegheny and a couple of other ones. But the one thing I think about this is just the extent of what they did on the grounds at the time with the full working farm and providing, their own food, and right down to livestock. I mean, that's not something that you would associate with an asylum. So this was rather unique, I think, in terms of the asylum that provided some. I think it would give people a sense of worth, just getting up every day and being able to go out and to perform something like planting or cultivating and looking after crops. They had corn, they had all kinds of things. They raised cattle, they had pigs. And so I think that as a patient at the time, that probably was better therapy than anything that you could possibly be doing in terms of some of the other horrendous things that they were doing.
Oh, indeed. Yeah.
So my story with this, outside of a couple of, being on the site and picking up on certain things, was an interesting story that took place when I moved here. And the correlation is just beyond bizarre, because when I came to where I am, I visited a very old historic house here in town that has been, it was a city building for the longest time. It was where the tourism and all of that was sort of happening. And the Roselawn Theater is there today, right? So we have the old, the Carter household, as it's called. And I happened to be teaching there. So weirdly enough, this was prior to that. When we first came to town, there was an investigation going on, like a paranormal investigation. And we got in on it, and we came into it. It was like a public investigation. And I have to say that the people that ran it, they honestly were like not really good at what they were doing. It was not the way I would run something. And that doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just, as somebody who's perceptive and as somebody who has done this, I just felt like they went about it in the wrong way with the wrong intentions. It was handled in a manner that was very aggressive and invasive to the spirits within the building. And I don't agree with that. That's not my style of doing things. But when I went there to purchase my ticket, I pulled into the parking lot and I was going inside to get the tickets. And as soon as I had purchased the tickets, I came back out, I got in the car. And this was like November. It was like early November. And I got in the car, and all of a sudden, in my mind's eye, peripheral, whatever you want to call it, there was a woman. And she didn't say anything. She didn't do anything. She was just there. Like, I could just sense her being there. And we were parked right outside of the house at this point. So we were just parked right outside the house. And I could sense her. I didn't think a lot of it at the time. I just said to my partner, I said, "Oh, there's a woman here." And off we went, and home we went. And then we came out for the event, and we were running a little bit late that day. I can't remember why, because I think we were actually out Victorian caroling prior to, and came home and got changed, and we went to this event. And we were about maybe 5 or 10 minutes into it. So we just kind of quietly crept into the banquet hall area where the tables were set up, and they were talking at the front of the room. And I just sort of slipped into the furthest table closest to the door so that we didn't disrupt anyone. And I sat down, and all of a sudden, oh, she was right there again. She was right beside me. I could see her as clear as day, but again, in my mind's eye, this is not an apparition just appearing that everybody could see. And I could see her, and she was a woman, I would say probably about 59, maybe 60. And I was just kind of guessing it at that time, just based on how she kind of appeared to me. And she was wearing a very pale, sort of sage green, darker, long skirt and a white blouse with a belt, sort of akin to maybe around 1900. So not Victorian in terms of the, stuffy, and not widow's weeds. She was wearing, it was just like a sort of day clothing that you would wear, women would wear at the time. And so there she was, and she told me her name, first name, last name, right out the gate. She said her name was Mary Schofield. And I was like, okay, well, that's not a name that you can just dream up, because it's not exactly Jane Smith. Right? I was like, Mary Schofield. And I'm like, I don't even know how to spell Schofield, So we started on this investigation, and it got to a point where From the moment I left the new building, we walked into the house, suddenly everything around me, I could see the home the way it was. So not the way it is today, but the way it was. I could see the wallpaper on the stairs. I could see the double parlor, which today had a dining room table, like a conference table in it. But I could see it was a double parlor. There was a men's parlor and a woman's parlor. And there was a sliding pocket doors, huge pocket doors between. And I could see the women's side. I could see the men's side. As we were walking to the back portion of the home, suddenly she disappeared. She wasn't with me anymore. And I was like, well, that's kind of odd. And I was walking around and then came back into the other main part of the house, and she was right there again. And it got to a point where I wasn't able to continue going on the tour with the people that were going around the property. I ended up sitting down on this little bench that was in the hallway, I think. I can't even remember now because my mind was not as it was, I was now her. She was actually, I don't want to say possessing me, but she was running the show. And I sort of could feel everything that she was feeling at the time. And she was very confused. And she just kept saying, she talks too much, she talks too much, she talks too much. And over and over and over again. And I was getting the feeling that something wasn't quite right with this lady. And I couldn't put my finger on it initially. And then my group, because they'd split it into two groups, started to go upstairs. So I let everybody else go up first and I lagged behind. And as I started to go up the stairs, I realized I couldn't see anything very clearly. Like everything was just like a blur, like black. It wasn't black, but it was just like, you couldn't really tell. I couldn't see. And so now I'm going up the stairs and I remember touching the wall, like trying to find my way using the wall to guide me up the staircase. And I got to the top, and we got to the top of the upper floor, and there was a doorway right in front of us, but it was a new doorway, like a fire door. And it was in the hallway, but it was leading into a room. And then she kept saying, where's the door? Where's the door? And we were walking down this very narrow hallway, which would have went to original bedrooms. And that's just, she kept saying, where's the door? Where's the door? And I kept feeling the wall, like I was feeling the wall the whole time. And then we got into the back part of the house, and there was this big bedroom that had this huge bow window out the back. And as I started to walk through the room, she disappeared again when I got back by the window. Came back, and she was there again. So now I'm thinking in my own head, trying to, suss out what's going on. I didn't say anything at that point, just, again, let the group go down the stairs. And of course, Ed's just listening to me. I'm just talking through her at this point. I'm just relaying everything that I see from her point of view, which really wasn't great because I felt like she couldn't see properly. But I think she had a good grasp on where she was because she'd clearly been there. So now we're going down the stairs. So we're going back, the group's gone down the stairs, and everybody's going to meet in the main parlor downstairs. But as I go to step on the stairs, she won't come. She's like, sit down. I can't sit down. And I'm like, what? She's like, sit down. She's like mad at me. And she's like, sit down. So I said to Ed, okay, this is going to look really weird, but I'm going to sit down. So I started to go down the stairs on my behind, like down the stairs. She was okay with that. By the time I got to sort of the landing in the last few stairs, I stood up again and I walked down to the bottom. And it was just really odd, all of these things. But again, the house to me appeared in a way that it did not appear today. It was in a whole different kind of look inside, the paint colors,